Good afternoon. My name is Zach Gibson, and I work in the Executive Office of the Governor. I will be supporting today's webinar with our host, presenters, and moderator who you will meet shortly. On behalf of Prevent Child Abuse Florida and the Department of Children and Families, welcome to today's webinar on bringing protective factors to life, knowledge of parenting and child development. We thank you for taking the time to join us, and we look forward to your participation. Please be advised we are recording this webinar and will make it, along with the presentation slides, available on Prevent Child Abuse Florida's website at www.preventchildabusefl.org. Our host to provide today's welcome
Let me get these
is
slides
Mr. Chris Lally. You are up.
All right. Thank you, Zach. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Chris Lally. I am the Executive Director of Prevent Child Abuse Florida. And I'd like to say, first of all, again, as I said last week, we really miss you all. You know, normally during April, we get to travel the entire state and support everybody by attending Pinwheels for Prevention events all over the country. Unfortunately, that ain't happening this year, but we have adjusted, some of us much more quickly than others, such as myself. But to me, there's no substitute for in-person, face-to-face interaction. And as soon as we're able, I'm going to go around the whole state and hug as many people as I possibly can. So if y'all see me coming, you might want to run, because if I get a hold of you, I might not let go for a while. We know all of you are juggling so many responsibilities right now, it's not even funny. My wife and I only have one 22-year-old son. So some people might say, we're not really parents because we hadn't had to put up with things like, would you stop touching me? Mom, Chris is touching me. So thank y'all for what you're doing for your own children. And thank you for helping other parents and making sure children are safe and healthy. I'd like to take a minute just to reflect. When I started my career over 30 years ago, I started out working in residential treatment programs. These were mainly wilderness-based programs where I was fussing and fighting with 10 teenage boys or worse, a mix of teenage boys and girls. Then in 1989, I answered an ad in the paper for a child protective investigator, which I applied for. I thought, man, I cannot believe how much this job pays. I told my wife, I said, baby, we will never be able to spend all that money. We'll travel, we'll buy a house. Wow, can you imagine what we could do if I could get this job? Well, I did. And it didn't take long before I realized that wasn't a lot of money after all. But I did learn some other things. I learned we needed to support each other. So we had informal support group meetings. And don't you know, even way back then, we wound up talking about prevention. We'd be generically discussing some of the cases we had, and sure enough, somebody would say, you know, we should do something to stop this before it starts. Or, you know, a little bit of help could have gone a long way for the parents that I've been working with. Little did I realize that was my informal introduction to prevention. And luckily, I would go on into 29 more years of work in the field of child welfare. Some of those years I was privileged to work with many of you on this call. Now I'm 25 years removed from my last PI days. But I realized we knew the answer for so many families way back then. A little bit of help goes a long way, and we owe it to families. I'd also like to offer an analogy. Most of you are probably familiar with the term preventive maintenance when you're talking about cars. You know, you change your oil, your filters, and doing that helps keep you from having to spend a whole lot more money later on repairs. I say we can apply that same principle to our work with children and families. In other words, if we pay a little now, we'll pay a whole lot less later on things like rehabilitative services, protective supervision, foster care, the cost of incarceration, and juvenile justice programs. In short, if we pay attention to prevention now, we'll save money, and more importantly, we'll save lives. After all, as Frederick Douglass, noted abolitionist and social reformer and overall statesman, a man who escaped slavery to help lead our country in civil rights reform, is quoted as saying, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." Guys, stress is a killer. We know that now more than ever. Incidents of abuse, neglect, and domestic violence increase when stress overwhelms people. So thank goodness we have some tools to help us cope with severe challenges like we face now. But it doesn't have to be severe for these tools to help us or for us to need help. Intervening early, or to quote another noted philosopher, Barney Fife, we need to work to nip these challenges in the bud before they get worse. These tools, of course, are called the protective factors. Today's webinar is the fourth in our series of 5 webinars, meant not just to educate, but to say, let's use these tools that we have. And for those who don't have them or haven't developed them, let's lend them a helping hand. We got a huge challenge in front of us as a nation, as a state, as local communities, neighborhoods, city blocks, and on country roads. We have to encourage each other. Sometimes we have to encourage people to ask for help, and sometimes we have to encourage people to accept it when it's offered. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, do happen, but it's really important for all of us to remember that we are not entirely defined by those experiences. The science behind the ACEs study tells us one caring adult can make a huge difference in the life of a child, not only in his or her life, but in the life of his or her children on down the line. So positive childhood experiences are critical for children to grow up healthy and strong, but they don't all have to come from their parents or in their home for that matter. There are teachers, there are case managers, nurses, behavioral health professionals, and substance abuse counselors on this call now. You can be the light for a child or for a parent. There are guardians ad litem, case managers, protective investigators, as I said, big brothers, big sisters, too many other professions to mention on this call. You are the light. Thank you for being there for kids and families. So today we're in luck. Not only do we have a very competent trainer to guide our conversation, but we also have a handful of others. Frankly, y'all, they've worked their butts off to bring these webinars to you. We got a very knowledgeable child development expert on to help us answer your questions today. Speaking of child development, I know with my son, I read What to Expect When You're Expecting like 19 times. I read Dr. Spock, or what we jokingly referred to as the instruction book, over and over again. I found out I was pretty good at being aware of where he was right then in his development. But if something happened in his world and he would regress, I found myself questioning my preparation. Like, wait, he's supposed to be past that now. And then there were times when he was developing ahead of schedule, and I would say, whoa, wait a minute, buddy. You're not supposed to be doing that yet. So I guess what I'm saying is we can never over prepare. We can never hear the things that we're going to hear today enough. So let's drink it all in. And remember, we all will make mistakes as parents. Our true test is to admit when we do, to learn from our mistakes, and to do the best job we possibly can at parenting our children and preparing them to become their best selves. So before we get started today, I'm going to exercise a little executive privilege because I think it's important that you know a little about the people behind the screen today. I'm just going to offer a few words of thanks to my partners in crime today, and I'm going to start with Ms. Maria Long. Maria Long is our trainer again for today. Maria is a certified Strong Families Protective Factors trainer. She's been doing this since 2012. She received her training from Be Strong Families, the Center for Study of Social Policy, and the National Alliance of Children's Trust and Prevention Funds. I also think it's important that you know Maria has volunteered all her time on this project. She's a selfless advocate for children and families, and we appreciate you, Maria, very, very much. Next, I want to say a few words about our colleague, Sarah Shepard. If you've been on any of these webinars with us, you know Sarah's powerful life story. Her lived experience, coupled with her compassion, her knowledge, and her steel-girded willingness to share her story with others, makes her a powerful advocate for children and families in her current role as certified peer recovery specialist in the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Program Office at Department of Children and Families. I also want to say thank you to another person who's been instrumental to us being able to bring you these webinars, Zach Gibson. Y'all may know Zach works in the governor's office. His official title is Chief Child Advocate, but if you know him, and many, many of you do, you know that his wealth of knowledge and his willingness to connect people knows no bounds. Zach is our work group's detail person. His position gives him a bird's eye view of all state programs, but it's his determination, work ethic, and all around concern for his fellow man that drives him to help support us and all of you. So thank you, Zach. We appreciate you and all the work that you've done. One final person that I want to say thank you to today before I introduce our special guest is our moderator, Ms. Janelle King. If I said Janelle is wise beyond her years, that would be the understatement of the year. Janelle's job title completely undersells her talents and her desire to help others. Janelle is one of those folks that doesn't really care what her job title is. She looks at her role not as being narrowly defined, but she does know what youth need, of course, but she also knows what families need. And her willingness to help others, coupled with her kind and generous heart, make her a powerful ally for all of us. And oh, by the way, she answers her phone even when she knows I'm calling just to ask her another question about how to work something on this darn computer program. So thank you, Janelle. Thank you for everything. Before I introduce our special guest, I just want to remind everyone, please use the question box to respond to our questions today. We really look forward to seeing your comments, and we will pause after the questions so that Janelle can read some of your responses. So now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest for today, Dr. Ann Hogan. Dr. Hogan has graciously agreed to join us today and to share her years of experience in child development. You can see her credentials there on the screen. Dr. Hogan spent a long career helping teach professional helpers and others how to help parents learn about child development, and she's agreed to lend us some of her knowledge today. Dr. Hogan has a PhD in applied developmental psychology from the University of Miami. But if you're a fan of one of those other schools in Florida, or elsewhere for that matter, don't despair, because she would eventually find her way to the FSU Harris Institute for Infant Mental Health Training, where she would serve from 2002 all the way to 2013. Since then, She's continued to work with the FSU Center for Prevention and Early Intervention Policy, where, among other things, she was co-author of the Partners for a Healthy Baby curriculum. She's also a faculty member of the University of South Florida at St. Petersburg's Infant Mental Health Certificate Program and teaches in the USF St. Pete Psychology Department. She also continues to provide training and consultation throughout Florida, and there's too many other things that she's done and is doing for me to mention right now. So I'm just going to ask her if she'll kick us off now with a few words of welcome, and then later she'll be back to talk to us more about child development as promised. Ann?
Thank you, Chris. And I can't say enough about what a great team this is. I just actually joined them to get ready for this. I wish I could say we've been working together longer, but we've actually been working together about a week, and it's been fantastic. So I can imagine that you all who are listening have had great experiences working with these folks along the way. They each are amazing, and I really appreciate that I've been able to be part of a team for us planning for today. I actually, thank you, Chris, for saying years, not decades of experience. I actually started working with little ones in childcare centers when I was in high school. I had a part-time job that I expanded and then worked there as part-time throughout my undergrad. And one of the things that I noticed early on is that some children have such an easy time learning language, and for others, they have such a hard time, and it really impacts so much about everything else in terms of their development during that 3 to 5 year age period. And so I was fortunate in that by the time I was about 18, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to learn as much as I could about child development, and I wanted to be able to help teachers and families use that kind of information to help them really support children in any domain of their development. Because I've been in the field so long, I remember a time when I was first going through my professional training when a lot of early childhood programs that were looking at possible developmental difficulties really, for better or for worse, were really focused on trying to understand what the problem was and identify if we could, and then somehow treat it or fix it. And sometimes in some of those places, we actually lost sight of the whole child and the whole family, and really thinking about this is a child and family with so many strengths. There's so many talents. There's so much they can do that's so good and so wonderful, that how can we take a more balanced perspective, wanting to help when there's a need or a concern, but then also really wanting to celebrate all the strengths that a child and family and their relationships bring. And what's exciting for me is that the field has really transitioned a lot in the last several decades to look more and more first at resilience as an individual characteristic of it, but then also really thinking about relationships and relationship networks. And so when we're talking about this today, we're really talking about bringing all the protective factors into play, really thinking about maybe there's a problem, and let's definitely work on strengthening it, and let's definitely find it as soon as we can, because that'll make the longer path so much easier for everybody. But let's never lose sight of all the talent and strength and capacity and ability that children and families have. We never want to lose that. And I think it's really exciting that this is a framework that really helps us do that. And as Chris said, being competent doesn't mean being perfect. Being competent means that when you make a mistake or are not sure what to do, you figure it out and you do it better the next time. And as he said, parenting's the hardest job in the world. And honestly, working in infant and toddler classes isn't necessarily a whole lot easier. And for many of you, I know your jobs are incredibly challenging and demanding. And so what's really wonderful is that you're taking this time today to share your time, your precious time with us, and to gather some more information, to get some more tools in your toolkit, if you will, to help strengthen children and families' protective factors. And so at this point, I want to thank you again, everybody, for the team for bringing me here, the audience for being here, and I want to turn it over now to Ms. Sarah Shepard. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hogan. We are so excited and grateful to have you aboard today. My name is Sarah Shepard. I'm a certified recovery peer specialist with the state of Florida. I work for this, I'm a statewide recovery integration specialist with the Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health for the Florida Department of Children and Families. Before I start, I just want to thank Chris on behalf of the work group. I would like to say thank you for your continued persistence in figuring out the virtual platforms. Since it doesn't exactly come natural to you, it has kept us all laughing and the group very lighthearted. I also would like to thank you for your advocacy for children and families and for your friendship. I would like to thank the Department of Children and Families and the Governor's Office for your leadership. Today, we are utilizing a community cafe model for this webinar and appreciate the opportunity to share information on protective factors and how they can reduce or eliminate all kinds of risks. We will offer several participation opportunities to include using the question box located on the right hand of your screen and polling questions. A little background on myself. I'm a mother of 4 wonderful children. I am a woman of great faith who has 10 years of long-term recovery with substance use disorder and mental health struggles. In 2010, I delivered a baby who was born substance exposed. At that time, all of my children were removed and placed with family members. I have received services from Florida's behavioral health system, and now, thanks to God and recovery, I have had the opportunity to become a part of the healing of our system. I was introduced to the protective factors in the 4th year of my recovery after having suffered several traumatic events while clean. I found out about the community cafes offered through Healthy Start in Volusia and Flagler counties and eventually began to work for them as a parent leader, working with parents whose children had been removed. The organizational framework of Healthy Start is based upon the protective factors framework. It is focusing on what is strong with families and not what is wrong. I was able to see how they could help break cycles, not only within the lives of the families we were serving, but with my own family and children as well. My children had experienced a number of adverse childhood experiences as a result of my own adverse behaviors and coping skills. And knowing that protective factors are teachable helps me to feel comfort in knowing that by implementing them in our daily lives, I am supporting my children by reducing their risks and supporting them while they are on their own journey of wellness. I truly believe in the power of the protective factors. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Maria Long.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that powerful story. And I just really also wanted to thank Chris for that wonderful introduction and to really say that it's been both an honor and a blessing for me just to be able to work on this initiative and to be able to support our families and communities throughout the state of Florida. And more than anything, to work with this wonderful, small, awesome team that we have put together to pull this off. They are like such an awesome group of people. I can't even begin to tell you, but they know individually and collectively just how much I appreciate them. So once again, my name is Maria Long, and I am the mother of 2 amazing grown children. I have a daughter, Nicole, who is 41, and my son, John, who is 31. And I have 2 grandsons, Juan II, who is 12, and Jameson, who is 2. I was blessed to be trained for the first time in the protective factors in 2012. And since then, I have had the privilege of teaching them to organizations, community groups, families, caregivers, churches, basically anybody who will listen to the power of these protective factors. The protective factors have changed the way that I parent my grown children, and certainly the way that I interface with and grandparent my grandsons, all in a positive way. I would recommend learning about and integrating these protective factors into your daily lives so that you too can be better parents, better grandparents, aunts, uncles, caregivers, in whatever capacity that you serve in terms of interfacing with our children. So I will now pass it over to our amazing moderator, Ms. Janelle King.
Thank you, Maria. And hi, everyone. My name is Janelle King, and I'm the Interagency Youth Engagement and Restorative Practices Specialist at the Office of Child Welfare with the Florida Department of Children and Families. I promise I'm the last one to introduce myself, and then we'll jump into content. I recently got plugged into the Protective Factors work group by Sarah reaching out to me, and so I'm really grateful for her connecting me to this group and the opportunity to be plugged in to this as well. So with that being said, there's a lot of connections to the restorative practices work that I do at DCF, which is really exciting. A lot of the work does focus on proactive skills around building healthy relationships and connections, so that prevention piece of restorative practices, which ties a lot into the protective factors framework as well. So now that you've heard a little bit about us, we would like to know who is joining us today on the webinar. So utilizing the question box on the right side of your screen, please type in and let us know what county you're from, and if you're representing an agency or as a community member or as a parent, or maybe all three. And you don't need to type your name, just as an FYI, because that automatically shows up. All right, so we have some guardian ad litem folks as previous from Hernando County, DCF, Orange County, Osceola, Hillsborough, guardian ad litem, Alachua, Collier, guardian ad litem, St. Lucie County, Pasco County Department of Health, Healthy Start, UF Child Protection Team, Northeast Florida, 8 counties. The answers are pouring in. Brevard Cares Family Advocate, Indian River County Guardian Ad Litem, ELC Monroe. People are from all over the state as usual. We have a victim advocate from a local police department in Miami. Parent and Family Engagement with Volusia County Schools, Sarasota Early Learning Coalition, Early Childhood Specialist, Anti-Drug Coalition, Citrus, Adoption Program Manager with Heartland, Circuit 10. So again, people from all over Sarasota, Sunshine Health. Thank you for introducing yourselves in the question box. It looks like we have a great group of people here with us. We have over 250 people attending today. So thanks everyone. And I'm going to now hand it back to Maria.
Thank you, Janelle, so much. And once again, want to welcome all of you to our conversation. So let's talk about what our conversational norms are going to be. So since we're hosting our Strengthening Families Protective Factors webinar virtually and not in person, I just want to share these conversational norms with you, or expectations in terms of how we will have this conversation for the next hour or so. So the first one really says what? It says, speak from your own experience, speak your truth. So in the case when you're going to be putting, you're not going to be really, you're going to be speaking them in terms of your information in the chat box. We really want you to make sure that you use I statements, because we want you to tell your story, speak your truth, because we want you to know that your voice will be heard, it will be respected, and we really value that. Nobody can tell your story better than you can. Be brave and tell your story. The second one, listen attentively and deeply. It says, allow others to speak. This is an important piece. Listen to what is being said. Listen to the feelings beneath the words. That is so important. There's a difference between the physical hearing and really listening and understanding. So when we listen attentively and deeply, what is it that we're doing? We're striving to achieve a balance between listening and reflecting, speaking and acting. Suspend judgment. We're asking that you would set aside your judgments. And in doing this, you can create a space between your judgments and your reactions, and it will allow us to listen to each other. We can listen to ourselves more fully. Judgments get in the way, whether they're positive or negative, they can get in the way in terms of what's being said, what's trying to be communicated. So to the extent that you possibly can, suspend those judgments during this conversation. And the last one, which is so important, we talk about maintaining confidentiality so that we can create a safe space. And when we talk about that, people are going to be sharing some very personal information in terms of how this protective factor has really made a difference in their life. So we ask that the stories stay, that the lessons can leave. Once again, we want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with that when they share something, it's going to be respected, it's going to be valued, and once again, it will stay within the confines of this conversation. So the last one, maintain confidentiality, create a safe space. What happens here stays here, to make sure that we all have a safety in terms of emotional safety. Change. So there's a quote that says, "The change is now." It says, "The truth is that our finest moments are most likely to occur when we are feeling deeply uncomfortable, unhappy, or unfulfilled. For it is only in such moments, propelled by our discomfort, that we are likely to step out of our ruts and start searching for different ways or truer answers." So this quote comes from a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. M. Scott Peck. It comes from a book that was written during the 1978 called The Road Less Traveled. It's really a famous book. It's what made him famous. And the book really talks about how it is we look to our inner strengths to successfully navigate change. So let's talk a little bit about change. We know that change is inevitable. However, how we see and respond to that change is really what's going to make a difference. We all know that change could be challenging and difficult, particularly during times like these. However, we also know that change can allow us to see and to do things differently. That's powerful. It can allow us to see and to do things differently. Change provides opportunities for growth and exploration. It allows us an opportunity to formulate new goals and plans, and for gaining a better understanding of who we are and our purpose in life. This can bring about better solutions and outcomes for ourselves, our families, and our communities. So we included another additional quote about change, and we think that this is important that all of us remember this. This quote says, "To the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you may be the world." And this really goes back to the whole idea that Chris has talked about it, Sarah's talked about it, Dr. Hogan's talked about it, that we individually and collectively, we can make a difference in the lives of our children, in the lives of families, in the lives of generations to come. We talk about that each of us can make a positive difference in those lives of children, families, and communities. We don't always know when the opportunity is going to present itself, but if we can build and implement these protective factors in our lives, we will be better prepared to the world to be the people who are counting on us. So let's learn more about these Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework as the tools that will aid us along our parenting journey. So the protective factors can help us to be the best parents that we can be each and every day, but especially during these times of uncertainty. But before we start talking about the protective factors framework, we're going to do a quick poll to find out your knowledge of the protective factors framework. So I'm going to turn it over to Janelle at this point.
Thanks, Maria. So if you're on your computer, you can see our question that we always ask on our webinars. Are you familiar with the protective factors framework? Yes or no? So we'll give it about 10 seconds for people to answer. Showing about 50% of people have voted so far. And I'll go over the results from the last 2 weeks as well for comparison's sake. All right, we'll give it a few more seconds. All right, 70% of people have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So as you can see, 58% of people on today's webinar, so about, if I have to do quick math again, about 100 are familiar with the protective factors framework, and a little bit less than that are not familiar. So comparatively speaking, 2 weeks ago, it was 50-50. Last week, 65% of people said yes, and about 35% of people said no. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it back to, I believe, Maria.
Thank you, Janelle, and thank you to everyone for sharing on our poll. So the Protective Factors Framework is a strength-based framework, and it seeks to help families identify their current parental strengths, as well as areas in their parenting which present challenges and opportunities for improvement. In addition to strengthening families, information on the protective factors are an important part of reducing the risk and the ever-present danger of child abuse and neglect in our homes, our communities, and across the nation, just as Chris said earlier when he did his intro at the very beginning. So what are these protective factors? So there's 5 protective factors. I'm going to quickly give you a description of them, then talk a little bit more about them. So the protective factors are, in layman's language, so to speak, and parental language, so to speak, it talks about parental resilience, our ability to be strong and flexible. And this protective factor, which was in our first week, we really talked about our ability to overcome adversity and challenges and to really be resilient in spite of those. When we talk about social connections, it says that parents need friends, but we really expand that to we really talk about parents need to have healthy relationships and the power of those relationships, which was week 2. Last week, we talked about concrete support in times of need. And in that particular webinar, we really talked about that at some point in our lives, all of us will need some kind of help. So we talked about what that help might look like and what are resources for you to go out and to obtain that help. Today, we're going to talk about knowledge of parenting and child development, which is really, I call it a 2-part protective factor. We're going to talk about the first part, which is knowledge of parenting, which really talks about the fact of being a parent is part natural and part learned. Then the second part, which Dr. Hogan is going to talk about, is that whole thing about the power and importance of the knowledge of child development. And then next week, we'll be talking about social and emotional competence of children, which basically means that it is our responsibility as children to help our children to learn, understand how to communicate effectively, how to recognize and to regulate their emotions, and really how to engage in healthy relationships. So those are the 5 protective factors. At the bottom, you'll note that it says nurturing and attachment are included within each factor. So one of the things was originally that was not a separate protective factor. However, the framework has since been updated to identify the importance of the social and emotional competences of children, with nurturing and attachment, which is included in all of those protective factors. Prevent Child Abuse Florida embraces all of the protective factors and recognizes, however, nurturing and attachment as a 6th standalone protective factor because of its importance to the relationship between the parent and the child. So today's webinar, once again, we're going to talk about the knowledge of parenting and child development. We're going to talk about the fact that this framework has been in existence since the early 2000s. It came about as a result of the efforts for the Center for the Study of Social Policy, or CSSP, which is kind of acronyms for that organization. We talk about when the protective factors are strong in families, what do we know? Children are safer and families are healthier, happier, and better prepared to manage stress and the change that is going to occur in their lives. We talk about the fact that families need all of these protective factors at some point, and sometimes collectively, all at one time, and sometimes individually, and that we should always be trying to build these protective factors in our homes and in our lives. And many of you probably are already building these protective factors without even knowing it. It was probably something you did or been doing because it made sense and it helped you to achieve some goal that you had in mind. But today, we want to make sure that we understand the power of these protective factors, how they will help us to be great parents, and to bring about what we want, which is healthy, safe, and trusting relationships with our children. So what are these protective factors? So if you look at the definition, protective factors really have 2 primary purposes. The first is to reduce or eliminate risk, and 2, to promote the healthy development and well-being of children. When we use protective factors, we are helping to ensure that our children perform well in a multitude of settings and environments in which they find themselves on any given day. Protective factors can help you identify healthy and constructive ways to deal with your stressors in a way that can help you become a better parent, caregiver, or just a better person, which was the case with me. And stressors can include situations like not being able to pay our bills, losing our jobs. Perhaps we're not able to provide food, shelter, or clothing or transportation for our families. We might be dealing with a current or a past addiction. We might be dealing with some sort of physical or mental issues, or something such as being a part of an unhealthy relationship. So there's all kinds of things that really are stressors and can really be seen as challenges in our life. But once again, if you understand these protective factors, if you embrace them, if you learn how to use them and to, and integrate them into your everyday life, they will help you once again to be resilient parents. So what is it that we know? We know that families thrive when protective factors are robust in their lives and communities. And you too will know that, you will experience that, and you will believe that if you commit to learning about and bringing these protective factors into your life. So how do we build these protective factors? So the most important thing that I tell people all the time is we talk about self-care. And sometimes that's really challenging because we always want to put everybody else in front of ourselves. But bottom line is, unless you are healthy physically, mentally, cognitively, emotionally, and spiritually, you really are not going to be much good to anybody else. So the most important thing is, how is it that you take care of yourself so that you're able to take care of those other individuals in your life that you may be tasked to do? So if you look at the little self-care wheel up at the right hand top of the slide, it talks about all these different ways, and this obviously is not, an all-encompassing, but it really talks about what is perhaps what we need to do. We need to look at how it is we prioritize things. You cannot do everything in life, so make those things that are priority and get those things done. We talk about the choices that we make in life. We talk about good choices and bad choices. What's the repercussions of those? We talk about our physical condition. Are we taking care of our bodies? Are we, eating right? Are we sleeping? Are we getting enough rest? Are we getting enough exercise? So these are things that we really need to think about. But personally, each of us needs to think about, how is it that you take care of yourself? So then we talk about commit to being a strong parent. And that's one of the most things that we can do. We talk about commitment. And sometimes, it's easy to follow through with commitments, and sometimes it's difficult depending on how big this change might be for you. But what I'm asking for all of you to do that perhaps have not already done, and most of you already have, commit to being a strong parent, and whatever that means to you. So once again, we talk about building these protective factors. We need to be able to identify our parental strengths. We need to look at what are our areas of improvement, and really to develop a plan to enhance those strengths, as well as what do we need to do to address those areas of need. So building a healthy relationship with each of your children is absolutely necessary if you're going to be able to understand and address their unique needs. I tell everybody the greatest gift you can give your child is to know your child. No two children are the same, not even identical twins. Know your children, because if you know your children and they know you, that is the beginning of that bonding, of that healthy, safe relationship. So how you respond and react to situations will model and influence how your children may respond and react as they get older. Remember, you are your child's first and most important teacher. So let's talk a little bit today about the first protective factor, the first part of this protective factor, which is knowledge of parenting. And we talked about that it's a two-part. It talks about being a great parent is part natural and part learned. So today we're going to just provide a very, very high level introduction to this protective factor. It talks about, once again, the fact of being a great parent is part natural and part learned. So the part natural really talks about our temperament, which really first refers to our personality traits that determine how we can react to the world. And there's all different kinds of temperaments, and that has a real role in terms of how it is you become a parent, and how it is at some point when you decide to be a parent, the things that will become naturally for you. The part learned really refers to how it is we were parented, how we saw other children being parented, and the information that somehow we gained along the way that influenced how our parents parented us. So part natural is who we kind of are from a temperamental perspective, and part learned is what we experienced and we saw other people experience. So really, this protective factor has really two interrelated components. I talked about the component of parenting, but the other piece is that child development piece. And both of them are so important in terms of strengthening our skills to create an environment that, once again, is safe, strong, and welcoming for our children. So as we go through this webinar, I will be sharing information once again on this parenting piece. And later on, Dr. Hogan will be talking about information on the knowledge of child development. We also will have our colleague, Sarah Shepard. She's going to be sharing such a powerful personal story about her experiences in terms of how it relates to parenting and child development. These efforts are designed to provide you with valuable information and resources that will help you obtain and enhance your parenting skills and knowledge of your child's development. So before we go any further, I'm going to ask Janelle to present our first question to the participants.
Thank you, Maria. We would like to get your thoughts on this question that's on your screen. So using the questions box, please share your response. As a parent or even maybe caregiver or mentor, if you're neither of those, how are you the same and possibly or different from your parents? So this could be an interesting question to start thinking about. How are you the same or different from your parents? Someone says they're much more connected to their kids, similar personality and morals, communicate more than my parents did, pretty much the same strong faith. Someone said no apparent differences. I'm more flexible and open to new ideas. Someone suggested that they're very more hands-on. My children have a voice, their thoughts and feelings are considered. That's a really important point there. Compassionate like my mom, avoid belt whippings like my father used. Thanks for that comment. Someone said 95% so different. I allow my child to have an open mind and voice. Better, a lot of people are talking about communication, different communication styles. As a parent, I am the same in that I have strong values that I have instilled in my children, but I'm different in that I have allowed my children more independence. Someone mentioned being less judgmental. Someone said, show my kids they are always loved, much more lenient, more affectionate. Yeah, so thank you everyone for sharing these responses. They're coming in, they're pouring in, but I think I'll go ahead and turn it back to Maria now to share what is some more information about knowledge of parenting and child development. Thanks everyone.
Powerful feedback. Thank you so much for that, just participating in that question. So it's really not a surprise to anyone to know that the knowledge about parenting and child development helps us to parent more effectively. The multitude of web pages, blogs, books, and TV experts touting science-based information, as well as sometimes wacky opinions, evidence just how much parents want and need information. But what's the key? The key is for us to find out what is the best possible information that we need to address whatever that situation is that we're encountering at that point. So this protective factor really talks about our ability to exercise effective parenting techniques and strategies to guide and to know what to expect as our children develop in multiple domains, how they develop physically, cognitively, from a language, and social and emotional perspective. This particular protective factor helps us define what parenting looks like when families have good information and the skill that they need in terms of making sure that they understand at every stage of their child's development, what are the things that are on track or not off track. So it really enables them, once again, I tell people all the time, if you need to raise a yellow flag or a red flag, wait a minute, there's something going on with my child that is not appropriate, it's not on target, and what to do about that. That's that whole child development piece. But us as parents, we need to understand what our role is to be able to identify. It helps us define what parenting really, why it's so important in terms of the fact that parents have to be committed to changing their parenting patterns sometimes. One of the things I talked about, the fact that I am a very different parent than my parents. My parents were the type of parents that there were 4 of us, and if something went wrong and they couldn't figure out who did something in the house, they would give all 4 of us a whipping. I mean, a physical whipping. And as a child, I understood that was so wrong because I was the child that was afraid to do anything wrong. So I ended up getting whippings for things that I did not do. And even as a child, I told myself when I became a parent, I would never whip my kids. And I didn't. So I took a different strategy, which ended up not being a good one, once again, because I didn't know about this whole body of work. So I started yelling. So that was my way of yelling at my kids to get things done. I would never whip them, but I would yell at them. And what I really found out is once I investigated this body of work, that yelling really is a form of emotional abuse. And it was so detrimental in terms of how it, to me, once I found that out. And my son, who once again is 31 now, like 5 years ago, he told me, he says, Mom, sometimes I really wish that you would have whipped me. So you can believe, at this point that I'm not a whipper and I'm not a yeller. I'm a totally different child. I mean, a totally different parent in terms of how it is I grandparent my grandkids when they upset me or when I'm trying to get them to do something. Totally different strategy. So we do need to understand sometimes as parents, when we understand that things are not the way that they should be, that we have the ability, we have the power, we have the choice to change what that looks like. And now my kids are like totally different. They're not yellers and screamers or whippers. And I just thank God that they looked at me and said, I don't want to be like my mom. So I learned a lesson, but it wasn't a lesson where I really changed it with something positive. So my advice to you is really make sure that if you want to make some choices, try to really educate yourself about maybe the best choices that you can make. So now let's discuss a little bit more about the whole knowledge of parenting and what does it look like. So knowing what good parenting looks like is really the first step in becoming what I call a great parent. And one parent said it best when she said, learn more so that you can parent better. But my expression is, I've heard it, if you know better, you do better. So delivering accurate knowledge and information in a way that parents can understand and use that information is not always easy. So this really talks about what is it that we as practitioners can bring to the table in terms of helping our parents to understand what does this really look like and feel like, and how is it that we can help develop them from a parenting perspective. One of the things we really need to keep in mind, it says, while there are some excellent parenting education classes available, most studies show that they don't work for all families. So once again, each family has a unique set of needs. We need to figure out, by working closely with that family, what is really the issue here, and what are the tools and the skills and the knowledge that they need to address those specific needs. One of the things I always talk about is the role of culture. And sometimes I think that we really don't think about how powerful that is, but it is so powerful, especially when we talk about this whole thing around parenting and child development. Culture can play a significant role in determining when we seek advice, what kind of parenting techniques we use, and really what our expectations are in terms of our children's development. Different cultures around the world have very different ways of looking at things. For example, in the United States, I'll just use one quick example, safe sleep. We believe that children need to the ABCs of safe sleep. A baby should always sleep alone, always on its back, and in a crib or some other safety approved sleeping device up until the age of at least 1. That is really, we believe that, and that's what we teach. We call it the ABCs of safe sleep. However, I did some research, and over in India, children sleep with their parents physically in the bed and in the room up sometimes until the age of 10. So it's totally a different type of culture. You need to understand that when we are interacting with people, because we have a certain belief system and we think that this is the way that it has to be done, we ultimately have got to understand the power of that culture and how that may or may not impact the information that we're trying to bring to the table. So we need to be able to address our parents from what I call it, what's strong versus what's wrong. I've heard that talked about a couple of times already, once again by Chris and Sarah and Dr. Hogan. This is strength-based. That is how we need to always to approach our parents. We know they're doing some good things. So what are those things that they're doing right that we can make them feel good about so that we help them understand we're on this page together? So we talk about the whole idea of remembering that learning happens when the context of mutual trust and respect. I tell people all the time, if you really want to help a family make a change, you've got to be in a strong, trusting relationship with those individuals, especially if they are from a different culture. We talk about we need to create an environment where parents are comfortable asking for help. And it's really by what I call normalizing the situation. So to reduce that stigma, sometimes people they feel like if I ask for help, there's a stigma associated with that. We talked about that last week. We talked about our concrete support, that sometimes people just feel shame and, why should I have to do this? And there's all this stigma attached. No, we need to bring it to the table that we're here to offer you support and assistance. If you want to give it a different name, whatever it takes for them to understand, it's okay. We're here to help you get those things that you need so that you can be a better parent. You can provide the things that you need for your family. That's our role as practitioners, to be their partners. And it's such an honor to be able to do that and to be that. We talk about the parents must be given an opportunity to learn about new parenting techniques, new parenting information, new perspectives. And really, we need to make sure that they have an opportunity to practice those new techniques and skills with their children. Remember that, like children, parents have teachable moments. I call it just-in-time training. And this can happen. It could be something as simple as a conversation. It might be the fact that you might be role modeling that behavior, or you might be providing them with some additional information, or just telling them where they can go and get some additional information from on that particular topic. So parents have teachable moments. Let's take advantage of those. So this means for those of us who can see and interact with our families on a day-to-day basis, to the extent that's possible, we need to take every opportunity to help our parents grow their parenting skills, their knowledge and experiences, so that our families, all families, can be healthier, more knowledgeable, loving, nurturing, and safer. So why is parenting so important? So the knowledge of parenting is important for so many reasons. Our knowledge of parenting will help ensure that we provide the right amount of nurturing, supervision, and guidance to our children. If parents understand their role and learn about specific parenting techniques and strategies, they can positively impact their relationship with their children and have options for appropriate responses to typical child behavior. Parents need information, techniques, and perspectives to help understand the reasons behind a child's behavior and when it's typical and when it's not. A lack of knowledge about parenting can lead to child abuse and neglect. Parents could have unrealistic expectations of a child's behavior and the lack of knowledge in terms of appropriate discipline options. So we talk about the fact that having knowledge of effective parenting strategies and what to expect in your child's development can make the job of parenting easier and even more rewarding. So this is not a comprehensive list, but those are really some good reasons why knowledge of parenting is so important. So I'm now going to turn it over to Sarah to share her story on her journey to build her knowledge of parenting and child development.
Thank you, Maria. And I just want to say I do this work because I really believe in it. And I believe that I have had broken cycles within my own family as a result of implementing the protective factors. And I have taken so much from the world when I was in active addiction that it's my gift to be able to give back to help other families have hope of breaking cycles. So when we talk about using the protective factors to break cycles, knowledge of parenting and child development is one of the key protective factors in breaking the cycles within ourselves as a result of how we have been parented, how we parent our own children, and what we can expect from the parents we are working with. In order to give you a clear understanding, I'll just give you a few real-life experiences to highlight the importance. I grew up in a house with very little structure. Though my mom kept the majority of the house pretty tidy, my room was always a disaster. I remember really being down on myself because my space was never the same as anyone else's, and I just could not figure out why I was no longer capable or not capable to keep things clean. I was often referred to as the slob at my house as a child. When I turned 11, I was babysitting for a guy who my family didn't know. He came home drunk one night and did things to me that kids should not be exposed to. It seemed as if he liked me, and though I think somewhere deep inside I knew it was wrong, I had no safe person to talk to, and I just kept going back. My sister was pregnant by the age of 13, and she had a baby. I was 15 at that time, and I moved out on my own, but with friends. I held a job, and I partied pretty much all of the time. Using drugs and alcohol was the only thing that made me forget that I have always carried the weight of the world on my shoulders. I taught myself to swim, and as a kid, I also taught myself how to ride a bike. By 15, I was in full flight and fight mode, constantly looking for safety. By 15, I had already lived like an adult, and because I did so, my parents told me often that if I wanted to act like an adult, they would treat me as one. So fast forward several years later, and at the age of 26, my adverse coping skills had taken me to a place of hopelessness and despair. After serving some time in county jail, I stepped out of the facility and back into society. I was afraid to be a parent. I had children at all different ages and stages, but had no real idea of how to do things differently. Sure, there were parenting classes, but everything was forced, and the goal was to be successful and to show perfection. Parenting is messy and beautiful and hard, whether you struggle with drugs and alcohol, mental health and addiction, or not. So at about 18 months clean, when my kids came home, they had been home about 6 months, and I remember breaking down crying in a meeting because I had just realized my kids had been home that long and I wasn't sure if they'd even brushed their teeth. I had never been shown self-care and I didn't know how to show it. Luckily, I had safe people to turn to who understood and could help me move forward. A few years after that, after cleaning my kids' room over and over, I took charge and gave them 2 hours to clean it up. I went in and they were so proud because the bed was made and nothing was on the floor. However, they shoved everything under the beds and in the closet. At that moment, I had a small breakdown and I felt defeated, almost like time was destined to repeat itself and we would never be capable of being able to stay clean within the house. At that time, I didn't realize it, but I wasn't mad at them. I was mad that I wouldn't be able to escape that pattern that I had been told that I would continue to be. I picked up the phone and I called my mentor. I had met her at the cafes, and she was the executive director of the local Healthy Start. I told her the story, and she asked me one simple question: had I ever shown them how? It was in that moment that I had an awakening. I grew up quickly because I had to teach myself. So I went back in the room, got on my hands and knees, and I cleaned with them. Though as teens, they are still often quite messy, they now know how and what to do and what is expected of them, because I took the time to go in there and show them. Oftentimes, we have a misconception that because we know how to do something, our children should know how to do it as well. It's my job as a parent to teach before I expect. It's my job as a parent to guide and not to rule. When my teenagers are acting like adults, it's my job to kindly remind them that they are still children, but they're on their way to being successful adults, and that I love them and I'm here to support them along the way. When my daughter turned 15, she worked at a local 23-year-old cook touched her in ways and said things that were more than inappropriate. She came to me, and I would love to say that I knew what to do at this time, but the truth is I did not, and I shut down. It took me 2 days to reach out for support as a result of my own traumas. However, I recognized that she felt safe to come to me. I owed her an apology for not handling it appropriately or timely at first, but because she knows of my traumas as a child, she understood, and we were able to work together through it, while I received support from the parents who surrounded me. I know today that these situations did not arise because I am incapable. They have been presented into my life again so that I may do something different and we can work to break the cycles. For me, the tools I have used to do this have been reaching out to other parents who have an understanding of the development of children at each moment where there is a struggle within my family. I utilize concrete support by educating myself with literature from books and using YouTube and the internet. I remind myself that I am resilient enough to break the cycles and chains of addiction, and so we can break any cycle. I cannot teach what I do not know, and knowing this and how to utilize the other protective factors have helped us through these situations and much, much more. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Janelle for a poll question.
Thank you, Sarah, for your powerful story, for sharing that. So this is the question box response that we're looking for responses from you all. And the question is, what parenting skills have you learned that assist you with being a good parent? So as answers are coming in, I just wanted to thank Sarah for her vulnerability with sharing that story with all of us today. So again, what parenting skills have you learned that assist you with being a good parent? A lot of people are saying listening to my children, teaching by example, active listening, validating my kids' feelings. That's so important, yes. Being a good listener, that a good parent isn't a perfect parent. That gets to what Sarah was talking about. Modeling behavior that she wants to see, giving respect to our kids, how to use attention to reinforce the behavior that I want them to increase. To be open to my children, don't be afraid to say I'm sorry or I don't know, but we will find out. Self-reflection before responding, yeah, so taking time to pause and think about how you'll respond. Listening, modeling timeouts or withdrawal of privileges temporarily versus corporal. Let's see, giving participation in decision making, that is so key. Delivering discipline with warmth, listening more and being more caring, knowing that other parents go through some of the same things. I can talk to my children, letting them know I'm not perfect, to remember that we all make mistakes. Yeah, thank you everyone for these responses, not assuming. So I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Ann Hogan to discuss information on child development. Thanks everyone for your perspectives and ideas.
Hello, everyone. And I also want to echo Janelle's thanks to Sarah about what a powerful and inspiring story about how we can all develop at any age. That we think about child development, but it's also really important for us all to think about parent development and adult development. And that was just an amazing story. So thank you again. In terms of thinking about knowledge of child development, some of this is related to what Maria was talking about, but we just want to be sure that I want to be sure I add a few things to some of what Maria said and a few points here. As I shared with the team, this is really something that I feel very passionate about sharing, and so I'll try to be sure that that I'm clear and don't run on and on. But I'll try to use my own self-control. Let me put it that way. In terms of thinking about knowledge of child development, so there are a few things in terms of what it is, and I wanted to make a couple comments on a few of these. So certainly we can think about the domains of development, and we all as adults looking at children, whether we're parents, teachers, in any capacity that we have, we look at a variety of different domains like physical or cognitive or language. And that's important for us in terms of identifying strengths or possible challenges to address. But I wanted to remind us all that basically we can think about that way because we're adults, but babies don't experience development as broken down into different domains. For a baby, their experience is all of those things simultaneously. And so, for example, when a 12 or 13-month-old is first starting to walk well or pretty well independently, and they're walking over to a parent or a family member that they're really excited to get close to on their own, that they can move themselves. That's a combination of motor and balance and planning and perception. And as they're getting closer to that person, they're getting more and more excited. And that means that they've got to regulate their body a little bit better because they're getting pretty jazzed up and excited. And then when they get close and their parent or family member is smiling and reaching out and laughing, and they're feeling that strong emotional connection to be close, and then the parent is clapping and hugging them when they get there, that's a life experience for a baby that's really, really meaningful. And yes, we could check off, takes 3 steps unassisted or something like that. But the point is really that as we're looking at children's development, we're really also thinking about the full experience of their development across all those domains. So we can break them up, but that's not necessarily how babies experience their lives. And then the notion of interconnections, and especially in early development, but across our lives really, a lot of development in one domain is connected to others. Strength in one domain might really contribute to others. Vulnerabilities in a domain might interfere with others. I know from my early work that many times children that were really struggling a bit for a while with their expressive language, they had some struggles with self-control and managing their frustration because they wanted to be able to communicate and they knew what they were trying to say, but it was hard for those around them to understand. So we want to think about the domains, but also their interconnections and interplay as children are experiencing them as they develop. In terms of thinking of inside and outside, when we think about the developmental blueprint, that we're all born with, we can think about that blueprint as really being the inside out. That's our genetic complement, if you will, our constitution. And that's what babies bring. It would include things, for example, like temperament, as Maria mentioned before. But there are also the outside factors, the environments, the relationships, the people. And those are also very important as well. So as we're looking at protective factors, we want to be thinking about the inside protective factors, but also the outside protective factors, because those are the things that we can really build and work on and really construct them for children as families as we're working through them. In terms of thinking about warning signs, red flags, one of the great things about the resources that you'll get from the team is there are a lot of different kinds of screening tools. So when you know what should be developing at a certain time, it's possible to get some follow-up information to be sure that you're addressing a need that might be emerging as soon as you can. Because again, the faster we start support, the faster children get back on a developmental trajectory, a developmental pathway that's best for them. Maria also mentioned culture. And so again, I don't want to repeat what she said, but it's so important and so critical that we understand that. Sometimes though, some of the things that we learn in our culture, we learned when we were so little, that sometimes we do them automatically and we may not even think about what they mean. So helping us realize that some of what we do in culture is something that we know about and can talk about, but some of it's almost automatic. And so as we're thinking about working with families and understanding what children's developmental patterns look like, we want to be sure that we're aware of how similar or different families and cultures can be in terms of what they're expecting for children and what they're looking at in terms of typical behavior and development. In terms of guidance and discipline, we can really think of those as Maria mentioned, a variety of techniques that we can use. It's really the toolkits that we bring. We've got a variety of different strategies that we can use. Some of them can be more successful, some of them possibly less successful. But in terms of your knowledge of child development, what I want you to remember is that actually development is happening so fast in the early years that all those different developments in memory skills and language skills and emotion skills, those can really affect what kinds of guidance or discipline strategies might be most effective or helpful. And so again, knowing where a child is in development can help you figure out what might work better for a younger child or an older child, because you'll know how their current developmental skills will really help support their ability to follow your guidance or follow your discipline strategies. So again, all of those things really build on how much you know already and how much you're learning about child development. And I also just want to say before we go to the next slide is that knowledge of child development is always evolving. We're always learning more and more. And some of the things that I first learned, a couple decades ago, we don't necessarily think the same thing now. So you want to keep updating your knowledge about child development and helping families get their knowledge updated as well. So now as we move on to thinking specifically about early emotions, I want to mention just this in terms of what's on this next slide. There's both a few words and then also that gorgeous diagram, which I'm not sure how many of you can see, but you can download it to be able to get more information. And I know y'all will probably talk about this next week, but those early emotions are really important, both in terms of how they help us understand children, little ones especially before they have language, but then also because they're such important motivators for both young children and for ourselves. And in the first year, we can look across those first few months and actually see a developmental progression across these different emotion expressions that can help us make sense of the baby's world. And so when we think about when a baby is born, we can see a range from comfort to distress. And that really helps guide us in terms of knowing how the baby's feeling. Is the baby comfortable? Is the baby distressed or unhappy or fussy or hungry or hot or cold or wet? And so we really are using those cues as ways to understand the baby's experience. I wanted to mention in particular, babies start showing the emotion of interest when they're born. We actually can look at newborns' behavior and see their interest if we watch carefully in things that they can see and things that they can hear. And being able to know more about a baby or a young child or a toddler or a preschooler's interest can really be a powerful source of information in terms of really helping you understand your child as a person and really help you figure out what your baby's experience is like that will help guide you in terms of your teaching or guidance or discipline strategies. By about 2 months of age, most babies are clearly showing a social smile, a sign of joy that makes us all feel happy when we see it. And those sharing of those joyful moments is really important as well. In the first few months of life, we'll also start to see the emotion signals of anger. And anger is a really important emotion, although it can be very frustrating and challenging for us as adults when we're around a baby or a toddler who's feeling angry. But the value of thinking about anger is that when a baby's goal is blocked, when they're trying to reach for your new glasses or trying to pull your hair or trying to grab something that you don't want them to have, that's when we'll see anger. The importance of that is a signal, though, is a baby has goals. A baby wants to get something done and they can't do it, and so they get mad, which is what happens to all of us. When a goal is blocked or we can't do what we want, we get mad. That's a sign of ourselves. And when a baby is showing anger, it's a sign of himself or herself. And so it's not that you don't want to support them in the moment, but sometimes seeing their anger as a sign of goal-directed behavior is helpful. We want babies to have goals. We actually worry about babies when they don't show that they want anything or need anything or desire anything. And so it's actually a key developmental milestone, even though, again, sometimes it can be kind of upsetting to us. And fear is also important. Fear shows us that babies have a sense of security, and when they don't have it, they'll show fear. And again, another important signal in terms of what's a baby trying to communicate to us and how can we build our relationship in terms of how we're able to take care of them and help them in these moments of distress, anger, fear, and then celebrate happiness in these moments of joy that start in these first few months of life. By the second year then, as we start to look what's coming up in year 2, we're really looking now at socialized emotions, and these include things like then pride or shame or empathy. And what's important about these, and we were talking a few minutes ago about culture and families, these are really socialized, culturally founded, family-based emotions. When toddlers feel pride or shame or empathy, that's really reflecting the feedback that they're getting about whether they're doing well, whether they're doing what they should be able to do, or whether they're not good enough. Are they able to respond in an empathic way to somebody else's distress? But those are all things that are founded really in our family relationships. And when we talk about the importance of appropriate developmental expectations, which again, both Maria and I talk about a lot, it's because we want to be sure that we are expecting things that children at that age can do. And if they're doing it, we want them to feel pride. But if we're asking a child to do something they can't do, they're not ready yet, they're not old enough, it's not a skill they have, that can lead to shame and feelings of shame. And all of us struggle when we feel ashamed. All of us have a hard time when we're disappointed with ourselves. So we really want to think about all those emotions coming on early on. So now if we're thinking about what this knowledge will help you do, what comes next, then the really key is 1. You'll know the importance of protecting your baby's brain when your baby's a little, because a lot is happening early on, and we really want to be sure that in terms of protective factors, we're addressing protecting early brain development as a huge important start in babies' lives. We also want to be thinking about improving your observation skills. And the more you know about development, the more you know what you're looking for. And so that's critical to be able to see those developmental changes and celebrate the positive ones. And that really helps us then, okay, as you know your observation skills, you know what you're looking for, then because you are, as a family member, as a parent, you may be the ultimate expert on your own child. And so although I can tell you about at this age they might do this, or at that age they might do that, the key here is really you're making sense of your own child. Why are they behaving what they do? What are they doing? What does this behavior mean? And knowing more about development and improving your observation skills will really get you to that place. so that then when you want to be applying parenting methods of discipline that are appropriate, you basically can tune them right in to your own child in terms of what you know at this time, at this moment, at this age or stage. This is what's likely to work most effectively. So now I want to go ahead and go to our next participant question. And so Janelle, could you please move us ahead on that? Thank you.
Hey, thanks for that, Anne. And just due to time, we're actually going to skip our participant question. We want to continue with information from you, so I'm actually going to hand it back to you.
All righty, great. Thank you so much. And so in terms of now thinking about what does the science say? Because again, as I mentioned before, our knowledge base is changing a lot and sometimes more quickly than we think. So we want to be sure that we address some of this today and that I have a little bit of time to share this with you. So that first 2 years from conception up into 2 years of life is really an essential time in life because one, this is when, in terms of the rate of brain growth, it's happening faster than any other time in our life. And so it's essential that we're protecting brains during that time because that has such a powerful protection for later development. In terms of thinking about then the environment, experiences and environments, now that the brain is growing, those experiences are really going to shape what's going to happen in terms of how that brain develops and really then providing a lot of that good foundation that we'll need for much longer term learning and behavior. And so this early brain development, again, conception up into 2 years is really, really essential. And so now let's move and I want to show you the next slide then will actually bring us to some key points in terms of our care. And then we'll move to a diagram that I'm hoping will be helpful in terms of my explaining. What we can do in terms of the environments and experiences that we need is developing brains need proper nutrition, clearly. And so we really want to be thinking about those elements of care. And feeding, sleeping, that kind of regular stimulation is so important in terms of helping babies get through those first few months in a successful way, both in terms of their physical development, but also in terms of their brain growth. And this notion of the amount of stimulation, they want a variety of stimulation, but it's also important that there's not too much and not too little. And again, as a parent, as a caregiver, your observation skills will really help you get a sense of gauging what's the right amount of stimulation and when across the day and the night. And so that nurturing, that caring, that safe, those things for all domains that are really the key to developing those secure attachments early. Babies learning about trust, about care, about the power of those early relationships to keep them safe, to keep them growing, to keep them loved and cared for. And those early relationships then actually are what help us later be able to cope with stress on our own. Strong early relationships really enable us to create strong relationships later, but also when we have to cope on our own, we're better able to cope on our own, in part as a function of those early relationships. So as we move on, and we think then about what's actually happening in brain development. And I want to just take a moment. I promise I'll try to be quick, but I think it's really important that we understand this in terms of a couple of different connections, because brain growth has developmental processes. And one of the first important processes, it's not just the different parts of your brain, it's actually the connections. When we think about the connections, those connections across all those parts of our brain, those are the synapses growing and connecting. And very early in development, what's happening is those are growing at a really, really rapid rate. So that's the burst with the fastest amount of growth at one time. What's going to happen a little bit later, based on our experiences, is as we start to have certain kinds of experiences, some synapses get stronger, some of those connections get stronger and they get selected. And some of the others, basically they don't connect as much anymore and we lose them. So it's basically really setting up the wiring, if you will, of our brain so that we've got stronger connections to help us do some skills and maybe not some other connections to do others. What happens then next, so we've got the burst, we've got the selection based on experience. And then as those selections get stronger, we have another process that helps speeding it up. So as we get into childhood and adolescence and adulthood, a lot of things can become a lot faster, automatic, better connected. So as we're thinking about those patterns, the burst, the selection or the narrowing, and then the speeding up. That's what, in more scientific or technical language, that would be synaptic growth, synaptic pruning, and myelination. But what you want to really remember is the burst, selection, and then the speeding up. If we think about language development as an example, when we're born, every single one of us could have learned any language in the world. But over time, as we hear more and more of the languages that we're learning in our families and our contexts, we basically have those pathways, okay, selected, and they get stronger and stronger. So we learn the sounds in our language, the words in our language, the patterning of our language, and that gets stronger and stronger and stronger. So that then that our primary language, if you will, our first language, is the one that then can be most sped up, that gets the fastest, that gets the most automatic. And if we don't start learning another language until we're much older, then it's a lot harder because we already have those superhighways and express lanes for the language that we learned first. So thinking about what's happening for early development and why knowledge of child development is so important is when babies are little, we want to be sure that in terms of their experiences, we're giving them the experiences that help their brain grow the strongest, the healthiest, and also with the skills that they'll need for later success. So babies, for example, in the area of language, they can learn multiple languages a lot easier and a lot faster than we can as adults. And that's an important element to remember. As we think then about the possibility of adversity, because again, oftentimes we're working with families who may have had difficult experiences. We know that there can be challenges, and we've all are familiar with them. Many of us have experienced them. And so when you're interested in diving deeper into this for more resource information, if you don't have it, there's a lot more information about the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences. And then also there's a website here and additional resources to really help you with this, because we again know they can have such powerful impact. So in terms of impacts, we're seeing both short-term and then lifelong health problems, overall shorter lifespans, unacceptable social behavior and risky behaviors, and then also the challenges in terms of higher rates of other kinds of problems that again can get established early on and then lead to problems both for individuals and for those around them and their family members. So really danger to both themselves and to others. The one quick note I want to make about risky behavior is that actually there's some developmental periods in child development and adolescent development where risky behaviors are not unusual. Toddlers and teens, where they may be trying to do things that for them at that moment aren't safe. And so as parents and family members and providers, we want to remember, it's not that there may not be those developmental periods, but we need to be sure that we know when they might be and how we can best protect children during those timeframes when actually some of their skills may be a lot better than some of their judgment. We think about toddlers, because they can climbing up on bookcases or on the back of furniture, that's not a safe place for them to be. And we think about teenagers sometimes engaging in risky behavior that is dangerous to them, but they may not realize the danger at that point. How do we make sure our relationships are strong enough that we're able then to help them navigate through those sometimes typical behavioral patterns that nevertheless need to be addressed? All right. And so one more quick note on adversity. When we think about the letter A, we can think about A standing for adversity, and certainly ACEs are important. But we also want to think about A as possibly standing for angels. And in the infant mental health world, there's a concept of angels in the nursery. And I just want to be able to share that for many of us, we've had angel experiences. Angels, people or memories of people in the past who've been kind and loving to us. And because of those kind and loving moments, we had strong connections for those moments with those people, parents, grandparents, a special teacher or coach, other people who may have been very close to us at one point. And those experiences, those memories of those angel moments can really help us now continue to give love and care and nurturance as we move ahead. So again, that can be a kind of sense of protection from our angels and our angel moments. I now want to turn it back then. I'm not sure if we want to do questions or what's going to happen next. So Janelle?
Thank you, Anne. I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing that we all have angels around us and that we can all be an angel to someone else as well. So I did want to recognize we are running short on time, but we hope that participants can stay with us a little bit extra. So we'll go ahead and jump into our Q&A. We won't have as much time for the Q&A, but if you do have any questions for Dr. Hogan or any of our other wonderful presenters today, feel free to go ahead and type those in the questions box. And if we don't get yours answered, please go ahead and email Chris Lawley. His email is clolley@ounce.org. And his email can also be found in the PDF version of the webinar that will be shared on the website. So we will take any questions that come up right now for Dr. Hogan or Maria or Sarah. And Jessica just shared his email in the chat box. We have a question for you, Dr. Hogan. This person says, you said that the first 1,000 days or 2 years of life were critical for positive development, and she thought the consensus was at least 3 years. So do you mind maybe explaining a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And to be honest, I think that we can think of every stage of development as essential. The reason in terms of the framing of the first 1,000 days, actually a lot of that is tied to the importance of those early brain structures and functions getting online. And so different slides actually talk about, at what point is 80% or 90% or different parts of the brain. So I'm really glad that you asked that question so I can clarify that. As we're thinking about the foundations of a lot of biological development, the first 1,000 days are certainly critical. And brain development in early development is essential. But what I want to be sure I reassure people is our brains continue to develop our whole lives. Our synapses we can learn new things. It gets harder, it gets slower, but it's not that our brains are ever not continuing to potentially develop. The structures themselves may not change, but the connections in our learning can continue to change. And that's actually one of the things that we, in terms of developmental psychology lifespan, that we're learning more and more about, because we once thought that things got fixed a lot earlier than we now know they do. So thank you for the question.
Thanks for that response, Dr. Hogan. And someone actually sent a question right as soon as you were answering a different part of that question, which is she was always worried about the first years of life. Can we still connect? Can we still improve the relationship? Which is what I think you were just getting at about the neuroplasticity of the brain. Is that correct?
Exactly. And more generally, when we as developmental psychologists look at data, we're looking at group data, we're looking at summaries of lots of people, and we're looking at patterns for numbers of people. I would never want to say at an individual level that there can't be recovery, that there can't be development. There may be things to compensate in the past, but even if a risk factor gets higher, you would never, with an individual or a family, want to think that positive change isn't still potential, because we just know from personal experience that's not true. And we can't always know which families can heal and get better, and which may have a very hard time with that. And in the absence of being able to predict specifically about one person, I think we always want to be open to the possibility that we can change, we can repair relationships, we can repair certain areas. But some parts of our brain, of course, can't be repaired. It's not that part of the development that can get repaired. But in terms of our knowledge, our skills, our relationships, there's a lot of potential for repair and positive new development across our lifespan.
Thank you. I saw another more of a comment from someone. What was said earlier about focusing on parents' strengths rather than deficiencies, there was a cute rhyme to help people remember, but I forget what it was. Does anyone who was the panelist remember what that was?
Is it the focusing on what's strong and not what's wrong?
That's
I think
exactly
that's it,
what I was thinking. Yep.
Thank you. All right, well, I'm going to pass it over to Zach. There were a few other questions that came in, but just due to time, we are going to end. But like we said, feel free to email Chris Lawley and we'll definitely get you an answer to your questions. So Zach, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Janelle, and thanks again to everyone for your questions, your comments. What an amazing set of information that was delivered today. We're in the process of closing. We wanted to highlight this proverb because we really think it really embraces what we're talking about here, is that when spiders unite, they can tie up a line. When we come together, we can do some amazing things. And certainly as parents, we need to rely upon each other, our networks, to help us in overcoming an enemy or foe by coming together. So important. We also wanted to highlight some resources that are available. Prevent Child Abuse Florida has some great resources that are available from their website. We would like to encourage you, please take a moment to view those. The Department of Children and Families also has some great information through their Office of Child Welfare that talks about stages of child development, as well as dealing with stressful situations like coping with crying. Some great information that's all linked if you're able to download the presentation slides when they become available on Prevent Child Abuse Florida's website. We also wanted to highlight the resources from the Department of Health, in particular, information about the life course theory. This is something that we think is very powerful. The image to the right there, you see, provides you a visual framework of the ecological model of health. This is some great information that has a lot of breakouts as it relates to topic areas that they focus on. All this is linked. We encourage you to visit this website through the Department of Health, because there's some great information, again, to increase your knowledge and awareness of the life course theory. We want to bring protective factors into your community. There's so many different ways. We've utilized the community cafe model for today's presentation because they are so meaningful for conversation and learning. There's no focus on where you're at in life or who you work for, but instead what experience, strength, and hope you can bring to the table as a parent. As parents, we can learn from others of how to implement the protective factors in their lives, and we can use the information to learn new ways to implement them in our own lives. We are working with multiple stakeholders and collaborating across systems to bring protective factors virtually to offer support to families in each of Florida's regions. If you're interested in bringing the protective factors to life in your community, please contact Chris Lawley at Prevent Child Abuse Florida. As we move forward, we want to take a moment to reflect upon today's experience and for you all to think about how this has impacted you. Janelle, I too would like to bring up our last poll question for those that are remaining, if they'd be willing to share if they were able to increase their knowledge as a result of today's webinar.
Thanks, Zach. Yep, the question is up on your screen, so you can answer yes or no if your knowledge of parenting and child development has increased as a result because of today's webinar. I'll give it probably about 5 more seconds. And I am going to close it and share the results. So awesome. We had 97% of people said yes, and 3% of people said no. So glad we were able to share information and increase knowledge about this topic.
Thank you so much, Janelle, and thank you to Dr. Ann Hogan, Ms. Sarah Shepard, Ms. Maria Long, and Mr. Chris Lawley for the great information on the Protective Factors Framework and of the topic, knowledge of parenting and child development. We also want to take a moment to thank all the webinar participants for joining us today and for sharing your thoughts and perspectives. As mentioned before, the webinar is being recorded, and once available, it, along with the presentation slides, will be posted on Prevent Child Abuse Florida's website. We're also going to keep this platform open a little bit longer. If you haven't downloaded the handouts that are available, please take a moment to check those out. They include our opening slides that have a lot of great information that's linked to various web pages that you can access, as well as 2 handouts that are available for your use. Should anyone have any additional comments or questions, please contact the team at Prevent Child Abuse Florida at the email addresses on your screen. Our next webinar on bringing protective factors to life will be next Thursday, May 7th at 3:30 p.m. We will be focusing on a very important protective factor, social and emotional competence of children, certainly one you won't want to miss. Please visit Prevent Child Abuse Florida's website for additional information. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope each of you have a great evening.